Thank you everyone for joining us in today's webinar, From Trust to Action, the real value of influencer marketing. We're excited to have you join us for what promises to be a good and insightful session about one of the most talked about and often misunderstood areas of modern marketing. So influencer marketing isn't just for beauty brands or tech startups. In agriculture, where relationships and reputation are everything, it's becoming a powerful tool for reaching audiences in an authentic and meaningful way. Whether you're a brand just beginning to explore the space or you're looking to refine or optimize your current approach, this section is really designed to give you the real story behind influencer marketing and farming and what you can do with it, really. So we've got a good panel of speakers, both from inside our Hills Green and outside of the client. So kick us off with introduction, Siobhan. Introduce yourself.
Oh gosh, no pressure. Hi everyone, I'm Siobhan. I'm Head of Client Services at Hills Green. So I look after our client relationships and also our influencer partnerships.
And then Natalie, introduce yourself.
Oh, hi there. I'm Interim Managing Director of Promar International, and in a week I'll go back to my previous role, which was Head of the Farm Business Survey, which is a government project that we deliver at Promar.
And Tom, go on, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Tom. I'm Client Success Manager here at Hills Green. So I work with a variety of clients, one being alongside Natalie at Promar as well.
And AD, finally.
Yeah, hi you guys. Nice to see you all. Some familiar faces, which is always nice. I suppose I'm known as Mr. Strategy at Hills Green, really. So my background's very much actually in-house. So I spent a lot of my time in market management roles, both in machinery manufacturing, construction, agriculture, in machinery dealers, specifically in agriculture. And then the last 5 years at Hills Green, mainly leading on strategy, data analytics, that kind of thing, for all the clients that come through and work with us.
Thanks, guys. So we'll kick off with the questions. We will be open the floor to questions completely through it. So if you do have a question in the audience, feel free to either send it as a message, or if you're brave enough, put your hand up and you can use your microphone the old-fashioned way. But kick things off for Siobhan. Why is influencer marketing sort of gaining traction in ag? We seem to be a bit behind the curve compared to sort of your main consumer markets. Why has it started to grow significantly?
So I think we are behind the curve traditionally, probably a good 5+ years in terms of influencer marketing. I think recent research has shown more and more that peer-to-peer recommendation is becoming more important than ever. And I think given the rise of AI generated content and the mistrust it can sometimes create, consumers are very much looking to trustworthy sources. They're looking to people to recommend. And essentially what creators are, influencers are, is they're farmers on the ground, they're people doing the job, using the product. It's the old-fashioned way of chatting essentially to somebody at the market or over a brew of your kitchen table, the farm rep coming on site. And so it's just that trust. It's people buying from people, and creators do that for us in a digital space.
And Natalie, as someone who is both from a farming background and has used influencers inside your marketing campaigns, what from your perspective, why do you think it's grown so significantly?
I mean, I think it is definitely, as Siobhan says, it's about having a credible voice that you trust. There's so much overload of information out there on the internet. And so being able to engage a person, a known figure within the industry. I mean, our project was a government project, so there's obviously an innate mistrust of government there. And being able to engage people who are trusted voices in the industry to see that, they've learnt about our project and it is something that you should get involved with, I think was really key for us.
Hey, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I'd echo what the guys have said. I think there's something around a trust deficit would be what I'd say, and we're all cynical people. Is another thing I would say generally when it comes to marketing and advertising, and as we get more savvy around advertising and marketing, some more of the traditional approaches maybe don't have the impact they used to have. I think about kind of more editorial pieces. But that, just because I'm digital doesn't mean I'm hammering, the offline stuff that still has its place. But there is definitely this conception of, that's just a paid for piece, or that's just written by the person who works there type elements. And also just advertising in general, look at paid social advertising, that kind of thing. It's seen as quite they're just trying to sell me something. Whereas I think there is a place where you can bridge that deficit slightly. And trust is that key point. It's people that are trusted because they have their own platform, they have their own opinion, and they have their own view, which is unbiased. And it's that element that really separates it from more traditional activity.
So do you think, Siobhan, as opposed to other sectors, we all know trust is a big part of the sort of purchasing journey in agriculture? Do you think that's why it has seen such a big uptick as well?
Yeah, I do. I think trust forms a massive element, but I also think there's that humanizing marketing as well. I think we can sometimes read something, but if we have somebody tell us about it, we also go to these people to view their content. We choose to consume it. It's not an ad put in front of us. So when we do have an ad put in front of us and that trusted face is on that, we automatically resonate with it.
Then what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to influence marketing then on that point?
I suppose instantly that it will sell product. In some cases it does, but I think some brands look to influencer marketing to sell. And for me, it's more about brand awareness. It's multi-touch point marketing. It's bringing a marketing strategy together with the use of a trusted figure. But yeah, I think, some people set out to sell on influencer marketing, and that would be my biggest misconception, really.
So would you say, Eddie, that the influencer side is more for that top of funnel brand piece?
Yeah, possibly. I think I don't know if it fits into misconception, but one thing I would say is there's a habit as marketers, we all fall into it, of moving towards the next best thing all the time. And essentially, sometimes what we can be guilty of is overusing something in its early form. And I would say that, if you go from the transition of kind of direct mail through to email, everybody shifted to email. Email became semi ineffective because everybody's inboxes were full. You can fall into that trap with influencers where everybody's using influencers, and then that trust kind of erodes. So just to add on to kind of what was said before, Ed, remind me of your question because I went on a tangent.
Does it fit more in that top of funnel brand awareness piece?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. It's that, for me, it's top and middle. Like, I don't want to get too kind of funnel speak on everybody, but for me, it's about awareness. There's definitely that part of it. That's kind of the go-to, but I wouldn't discount the consideration piece, right? It's a great tool to help people to make a decision. So 9 times out of 10, a lot of people will be aware of your brand. And really, there's that supporting kind of considerations, that decision between which brand or which product to have. So don't discount it out there. It kind of covers the top 2 sections, if you like. And there are unusual circumstances where it could impact the bottom, but I wouldn't treat it like that in your strategy, that's for sure.
And so when it comes to coming from like a government perspective, did you see it, Natalie, as sort of a way of really just getting eyes on the screen for the wider campaign, or did you see it more in that sort of consideration, that trust part?
To be honest, I came at it from the perspective, not being a digital marketing expert, or in fact any kind of marketing expert, came at it from the perspective that I had no idea what it could add to our campaign. However, in trying it was really interesting I didn't know, and this is being really basic knowledge, I didn't know that you could get an influencer to promote your product or your service. So that was a learning experience for me. So we approached it very much completely being led by you guys and being led by the experts, and found, we just learned through doing it the first year that it gained traction, and it was very successful, and that was the most successful part of our campaign. So I think that it really added a air of credibility to our campaign that we probably couldn't have done just internally with our own voices.
And I think with Farm Business Survey, the beauty of using the influencers was that it got that message further. So I think very few people had actually heard about Farm Business Survey. So what we did was we were able to spread that net and reach a wider audience with your message. So I think that's how we, initially were so successful.
So you get the benefit of the influencers audience, which, you know, stating the obvious, but, we didn't have a ready-made audience. We'd never done digital marketing as a company. We'd never done it for this project. So we didn't have a ready-made audience of followers. But we did have the old way that we used to do, literally cold calling and letters going out to farmers. We did have a big list of farmers. So we had a good starting point. But that was it, really. And in a way, I think that was a benefit to us that we hadn't done anything like that before, because it was completely fresh to the market.
And Tom, obviously, you were one of the key managers of that campaign. Have you got anything else to add on to that?
Yeah, all I'd add is I obviously agree with all the points that have been made. The only bit I would add specific to probably the Promar campaign is probably that, again, going back to the trust element. Obviously, the fact that it's tied in with DEFRA. And I think there is still an audience within farmers where they're still hesitant to trust anything in that ilk, in that world. So I think the fact, coupled with the content from the influencers, who, like Siobhan said, they are trusted faces within their audience, they're building that genuine organic audience over time where people do trust them. So when they are putting their face and a name to something, people automatically build that trust with that campaign. And again, with how it helped us specifically with Promar was, again, that awareness piece, but also kind of reinforcing that trust element where it is something that they can get behind and kind of can support, which obviously led to an increase in performance across the board.
So Siobhan, there's a lot of things on trust, but a lot of businesses I know I speak to are quite hesitant on the influencer side because they're scared that it'll come across as a paid promotion. How would you say the best way to get around that sort of misconception?
I think we do need to be very honest when working with creators that it is a paid promotion. Obviously, it's part of the advertising standards guidelines that we need to adhere to that. But I think what we need to ensure is that creators are able to create their content authentically, that we're not providing scripts, that all we're providing is key points. So it might be, for me, it's about educating an influencer on a product as if they were a farmer buying it, so that when they go away, they essentially review that product, they show how to use it, they show how it fits within their system. But I think to ensure that content is honest, it is credible, it's authentic, we need to be quite fluid with how we work. We can't script things. We need to trust. So it works both ways. We need a consumer to trust an influencer, but we need a brand to trust an influencer to know that they'll do the best job they can with the product and that they'll show it in a light that their audience will engage with.
AD, anything to add to that?
No, just something that runs through my mind constantly about these things is you're in a funny world right now where you've got brands wanting to be like people and people wanting to be like brands. And so this influencer piece helps bridge that gap a little bit, because there's a lot of influencers want to make a brand of themselves, and there's a lot of brands who really need to be more like a person when it comes to connecting with the kind of target audience that they might be going for. In this case, it's farmers. But I think if you keep that in your mind when you're thinking about engaging with influencers and how that sits and where it kind of fits in what you're doing, it's a good first step of how to approach it. Because I think if you treat it like any other marketing tactic or channel, you might fall into the trap of almost forcing it to be disingenuous by accident, if that makes sense. If you treated it like you would do Google Ads or a blog or whatever, it's a very different way of working, and it should be layered into what you do as a wider strategy. There's no doubt about that.
So what makes an influencer right for the campaign, for a campaign?
Oh, you're asking me?
Anyone answer, or is it? Yeah, go on, AD, you volunteered yourself there.
Yeah, go on. I think the first thing is don't fall into the trap, right? Just because it's a big following or a big name doesn't necessarily make it right for what you what you need, want, or you're trying to achieve. The second thing is think about what you are trying to achieve. And, you know, it's like any good strategy. I don't want to sit here and teach a lot of marketing people how to suck eggs, but essentially start with your audience. You know, what is it? Who is it you're trying to talk to? And then what's your objective? And that objective doesn't always have to be sales. You know, like I said, think about this as part of your strategy. So what are you trying to achieve with the use of that influencer? And it might just be something around consideration. So then the way you use that influence will be slightly different. So it could be actually you just want them to demo and provide a review of that product rather than anything too major. But by doing that, what you're doing is creating maybe a bit of a halo effect where they then search for your brand. If you've then got your SEO or your Google ads in play, you're going to capture them. Or they might get some ads served to them, or they might see in the Farmers Weekly, Guardian as an ad or whatever. But it starts to be part of your wider strategy. And so once you've understood where that sits within your strategy, that's when you can decide who's the best person, because it might be 3 micro influencers all reviewing your product is going to have a much more impact than one pretty major influencer who might have relationships in place for similar products, and it almost then does look a bit like you kind of a paid promotion, if you like. And also then you look at your segmentation, so don't forget your audience. The good thing for me around influencers is that it allows us to segment. When you look at things like Facebook or Google ads, yes, there's ability to target people, but that ability is changing, especially in the ever changing dynamic of digital marketing, cookies, tracking, etc. What you can do with influencers is they will have their niche, and that's what makes them good at what they do. They have a specific niche which allows you to reach that specific niche. So there's lots of factors that go into, for me, selecting the right influencer based on really good strategy at the front end.
Siobhan, you got anything to add to that? I see.
No, I think Katie's covered everything. I say it's just about finding your perfect match, really. Somebody that aligns with your brand as well, somebody whose values fit, and ultimately somebody you want to work with on both sides.
And Natalie, I know that was a core part of the sort of farm business survey campaign, wasn't it? Just choosing the right influencers. And I think that was really interesting around the campaign as well, was how it wasn't just an influence campaign, it was an integrated approach with some paid ads as well. Would you say choosing the right influencers was a core success of that campaign?
I think it was a core success, but also we had some restrictions around, we had to be very careful that we're not taking on, especially because our client was the government. We have to be very careful that the influencer hasn't the previous week or the next week. Oh, sorry, have I disappeared?
Or you're still here? We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Everyone's frozen, but as long as you can still hear me. You have to be very careful that the previous week or the next week, the influencer isn't going to be, highly critical of DEFRA in a way that could be a negative for our client. So we did have to do a little bit of vetting of the influencers that we used to see what sort of content they were putting out, and be clear in the way that they promoted the farm business survey that it wasn't detrimental to the government's image. And that's quite a difficult line to tread in farming, where the government doesn't necessarily have a very good image at the moment.
Tom, we've got anything to add to that?
Yeah, all I would say is, kind of echoing Adie's point before about the difference and a mix of like macro and micro influences. I do think there's benefits for both in terms of, again, specific to the Promar campaign. You can very much fall into that trap of like, let's pick the biggest audience and just throw all the money at that and then hope all the leads come in. Whereas within the campaign, we need to be quite specific in the types of audience we needed. And the types of personnel and types of farms. So just throwing money at a generic wide audience wasn't necessarily the right approach. And you can mix that in terms of have a macro influencer for that awareness piece. But I think sometimes the micro influencers may turn out better, because like I said, it's that integrated approach. You're not just relying on them to post to their audience and you're solely relying on that to get your results. It's more about using the influencers to create good quality content that will resonate with the audience and the target audience you're trying to get leads from, or whatever the KPI might be. So it's definitely having that approach considered. So it's not just that again, just relying on the influencer's audience. It's about how you can actually use that content within your paid social or whatever strategy it might be throughout the campaign.
So
I think, sorry,
I'll go on.
just to
Aidan.
add into that, I think Tom, you know, I know he's continuing on from my point, but he is right. I think the thing for me, I would almost treat influencers like part of your content strategy. You know, there's content rather than a channel. You know, if you look at it like that, then you can utilize it in lots of different ways. You know, the way you would look at I don't know, let's say a long form video that you could then split into smaller videos for social, you could then write up into a blog for SEO and web, you could maybe turn into a thought leadership piece as a download. You know, it can be used quite widely. I would almost be looking at influencers in that way, and that's almost how FBS was used. And it's about how do you make the most out of that. Yes, they have their own platform, their own niche. They're also widely recognized in the industry, even though maybe people might not necessarily follow them. They're still known as for whatever it is they've built their brand around. So they can be recognized on other platforms. Now, whether you use that as a chopped up piece of content ready for paid social advertising, whether you then take that, put it on your website as a review or demonstration, whether you could then repurpose that into something written with a quote and an image, you know, use it as part of your content strategy rather than kind of seeing it as a specific channel over here that couldn't possibly be used across all the other channels.
One thing we did touch upon there, I think Tom mentioned it, was KPIs. So Siobhan, what sort of realistic expectations can you set from like an influence campaign, like based on like whether you're using micro or macro influencers?
I think it becomes quite tricky with KPIs sometimes because each piece of content varies. And I think it depends on the campaign goal. So for example, with a campaign we've done recently selling footwear, we set goals of average views over 2 videos. What we actually achieved were lower views than we set out to. However, those videos generated something we weren't expecting, and that was sales. And that was a return on investment of double the investment made in sales over a 4-day period. So I think it can be quite tricky. I think the only thing we can really set out to achieve is brand awareness, but how you measure that can be quite difficult.
Aidy, how do you measure brand awareness?
Great question. I think the first thing I say is be ready to correlate, because honestly, with something like influencers, it's a bit like offline or actually quite a lot of different media now and advertising now. Like I said, you know, with cookies and tracking and the changes and everything, it's all about correlation and looking for kind of where did we do that thing and what impacts can I see around that might have impacted that. I think in terms of brand, one of my go-tos is always branded search. You know, in general, if people have seen your brand, they want to know a bit more about it. You know, that influencer's videos had a real impact. They'll go and search for it more likely than not. If not, you could look at things like engagement quality. So if it's really impacted, you're likely to see more comments than likes, for example, on that influencer's post. That's always a nice measure. You can look at things like referral traffic. So, you know, how much traffic to your site is coming from other places. And then if you're really switched on with your tracking, you've got a CRM in place, you know, and a good sales team who can ask questions. It's the case of kind of saying, well, where did you hear about us, you know? And almost logging that as you know, oh, I saw X's video, or you know, you were mentioned in Y's video or whatever. You can start to get a feel. And why I talk about correlation is because, you know, make sure you've got a snapshot of 30 days prior. The video goes live, or whatever it is you're doing goes live, and look at 30 days after and see where you can see that movement happening, and then what else has happened around that time tends to give you a good feel. Unfortunately, when you get into the world of brand and measurement, you're never going to be dead accurate. But unless you want to start doing brand sentiment surveys and things like that, which obviously is possible, but at the frequency you would need to cover off every influencer's campaign, I think it would nearly bankrupt most businesses. But that's where longer term campaigns might come in, and that would be where I'm selecting what I'm doing, where I'm doing it, how I'm doing it. So essentially, if I've got a real brand exercise, a real top of funnel exercise I want to do, then I'd be engaging with an influencer probably on a longer term basis. So then a beginning of the year and an end of the year survey, given the agricultural cycle, 9 times out of 10, obviously that varies by your product and your service, you will get a good feel. What were we at the beginning? We engaged for 12 months with this person. What are we at the end? But maybe some of the smaller campaigns that might happen through the year, those metrics I mentioned previously are probably a good way to get a feel for what's happening.
So that's an interesting point on sort of the longer term partnerships with the influencers. Siobhan, what have you seen while doing these like influencer activations with the creators? What's sort of the key differences between these shorter and these longer term relationships and deals and campaigns? Like, what's the difference in sort of impact and range?
It's quite hard to compare some campaigns in that respect, but I think with something like Farm Business Survey, using the same set of creators year on year, I think has added massive value because we've increased that trust. We've been on a journey, so I think that's where one-off campaigns do sometimes work, but I think the trust and the partnership piece resonates more. You know, if we take a product onto farm and it disappears 2 weeks later, people start to ask questions. If that product is used and it becomes part of that farming life, you see continual use content from it, reviews, and that trust builds. So people become synonymous with brands. You look at Easy Fix and Tom Pemberton, they've got a long-term working relationship into years. They're both trusted because of that relationship. People not working with other competitor brands as well, I think is really important because again, it shows that they're bought into the product. They're not just advertising something.
Have you got anything to add to that, Natalie?
I think, to be honest, we're probably quite early in our journey with the survey to see the full effect of the longer term relationships. So I think it's going to be something that we'll look at, whether, because we have such specific needs to target certain sectors, whether we actually move to different influencers over time, or whether the longer term relationship works better for us. It's probably just a bit too soon to tell, and it's a very specific kind of product that we're selling because our participators don't pay us anything. It's free for them to take part, but equally it takes a bit of time and they have to give us their data, so that we're asking them to give us their data rather than their money. So it's a slightly different kind of product.
Yeah. So Tom, when it comes to planning like these influence campaigns, what sort of where do you start? So are you looking at audience, sort of content, platform, goals, end goal? Where do you begin?
I think obviously in terms of where you start is right at the beginning in terms of that initial strategy piece. So you're going back to the KPIs. Okay, what is the KPIs and the overall outcomes of this campaign, and then working your way backwards in terms of what is the audience we're targeting. And then obviously from there, you can start to piece together the channels and what will probably work best in order to reach those KPIs and those audiences. And then exactly like Adi said before, influencer piece and the part that plays is very much into that content strategy piece. So it could be a case of, I mean, even if that like the asset bank, in terms of if that asset bank isn't stocked in terms of from the client side, and you don't have interesting assets to push on social, you maybe just have statics, then it's another avenue to cover like a service or a product, adding influencers in. So again, like I mentioned before, you are benefiting from their audience, but you're getting good quality content from a trusted source, and that does also help push in terms of that content piece.
And then a bit on that as well, Siobhan. How involved should the brand be in making that content? Should they be given a strict script to keep, or is it a case of giving the products and letting the influencer run wild?
A happy medium, somewhere in between, I think. In terms of providing scripts, I don't think we should be doing that. I think involvement should be around education. So ensuring that a creator knows about the product, about the brand. We provide all of this in a brief. It's then around letting the creator be, and that's where the trust piece comes in from the brand to the creator. We know there are certain points that need to be covered, and we'll make sure they are, but the way they do that needs to be authentic. It needs to be in a style that they're used to creating, and it needs to be in a style that engages their users, their viewers. So I think there's a happy medium of involvement, and it's somewhere between providing enough information but not allowing enough freedom. And that's what we try to achieve by providing a brief that the brand will sign off and that the creator then uses to move forward when creating content.
Adi, anything to add to that from sort of a strategy perspective?
Yeah, well, it may not be a strategy perspective, but it's more of a encouragement perspective. Creativity can be risky, and there's no doubt about that. But I did see a stat recently that said that creative can have a 12-fold impact on profit. So don't overlook the risk for potential, good rewards. And I think the reason why these influencers have got the following and the engagement they have is from the content they create. And don't strangle that, I guess. Is what I'd say. Yes, there needs to be guidelines in place. Yes, there needs to be, your core do's and don'ts, the things you really need to get across, etc. But allow them to do it in the way that they've built their brand and the reason why you're approaching them. Otherwise, you're not getting what you wanted to get out of it in the first place.
I know a concern from a lot of businesses when going into influencer is sort of that whole. So you tend to have like a market manager who really wants to do some influencer marketing, but then it's usually whether it's a line manager, a director, or managing director of the company is a bit more hesitant for that risk. With a lot of market managers in the webinar right now, what advice would you give them to sort of internally managing that?
I think
direct to yourself.
Yeah, it's situational. I mean, there's things that run around my head in terms of it's quite expensive to get content is the first thing I'd say, and actually could be quite efficient to work with an influencer from a content perspective. So if you're looking to talk, if your conversations with an FD, that's a great way of maybe kicking it off. If it's with maybe a managing director or a marketing director who's worried about brand, then I think you just put checks and balances in place and make sure you're very specific around who you're working with and what it is you're working with them on. I think start small would be the other thing I'd say. The big thing with influencers, well, any marketing is test. Start small, have a test. Your risk is a lot lower, and then you can bring insights out of that to then start having a more constructive conversation further up the chain or a wider team. So that'd probably be the few things I would explore depending on what your challenge is essentially.
Anything to add to that, Siobhan?
No, I don't think so, really. I think it's just like looking at the bigger picture and showing the stakeholders that it's not a standalone piece of marketing, that it fits into a wider marketing plan.
So, Natalie, influencers is quite a big part of the Farm Business Survey campaign. What sort of would you say were your big key takeaways from using them in the campaign for the first round?
I think probably just the fact that they would promote our product, because obviously they have to agree as well, because they have their own brands. They're not just going to promote anything. So that was a big boost of confidence. And I think that was an internal boost of confidence to the whole team, because we had a team of people who'd never seen digital marketing done for their project, incredibly passionate about the project and the value of it to the industry and to to give DEFRA real data about farming. They're incredibly passionate about it. So to see some key faces that some of them they follow themselves, that they know these figures in the industry, and to see them promoting our survey was incredibly gratifying internally. So I think that was probably one of the big takeaways. So marketing not just for the external audience, but also for our own staff, and to give them the backing for something that had been dreaded for them, the autumn recruitment campaign of phoning farmers and trying to get them to sign up, and having that taken out of their hands and seeing it successful, and faces they know in the industry getting on board with it, I think was a big boost.
That's quite an interesting perspective as well. And I suppose, Siobhan, there is a misconception that sort of influencers will just work with anyone who pays them. Would you say that's the case, or?
There's a minority of creators that will, yes. They see pound signs and they get hungry. But I think anyone who sees the opportunity correctly knows that in order to make it a successful diversification of their business, that can't be the case. So I think I would always err away from creators that just see money, and I work with creators that look at the brand and the bigger picture, because working with any brand does have an impact on their personal brand as well, as the brand they're working with. So yeah, I think there are some creators that do operate in that way. They're not people that we would necessarily recommend for campaigns, and we're very careful about who we recommend for which campaign and how that sits.
Interesting. And when it comes to sort of the money side of paying the influencers to do an activation, a lot of the time people don't understand the real value of what they're paying for. Whether they just oftentimes they just see it as sort of just taking out a phone and doing a quick video. Why is it so expensive to do? But they don't actually see the time it's taking them to build that audience. What sort of perspective have you got on that front?
Yeah, I think, it might take 5 minutes to create that piece of content, but it might have taken 10 years to have built that following. And I think we need to appreciate the amount of time and effort that goes into content creation, the time in editing, the equipment, the technology, the software that's used, but most importantly, the community that they've built of people that are our target audience. That's why we're choosing to work with them. Where else do we have access to an audience in such a way? So yeah, there's a huge amount. Seeing creators create content, sat and watched them edit. I had absolutely no idea what went into that. I was of that ilk where you take a phone out, you post it online, and that is it. But there's a huge amount goes into it. Hours and hours of sacrifice of time, of editing at 3 a.m. before milking, of editing in an evening and not spending time with family because of that. So it is a job, and they deserve to be rewarded for their time.
So Tom, picking on you again, where do you see sort of not influence? Where do you see the biggest opportunity for people to incorporate influencers in another channel? Where I think that there is that sort of view that influencer is a channel by itself, and it can be, but it is like we've done for the Farm Business Survey campaign, that it is a really powerful when combined. What's the sort of the biggest opportunity for people to combine influencer content with another channel?
I think it's kind of several factors really. I think one, like I mentioned before, in terms of there is that case of if you are struggling in terms of that content side, and pushing a service or a product. I mean, to be perfectly honest, some products or services aren't the most interesting, and if you're trying to push it from a paid social point of view, sometimes the main aim of paid social is to stop the scroll, right? Is to get engaged in content that people will give you their time for, to kind of explore more about your business or your product or service offering. So in terms of that being one of the options, in terms of getting engaging creative content that maybe brings a product or service to light a little bit more. Yeah, I would say it always comes down to that initial strategy piece. So it's not just a case of just selecting a influencer for the sake of it, just to try kind of like give it a go. It's more of a consolidated, really thought through strategy piece in terms of where would they actually fit within the main strategy overall, whether that be content on for a paid social, or whether that is just strictly for like an awareness piece like organic, or again, it kind of goes back to KPIs as well. There's a lot of factors really that you need to kind of take into consideration.
Anything to add to that, Aidy?
No, I'd agree with what Tom says. I think there's probably an opportunity in, if you go back to that brands trying to be people trying to be brands thing, I definitely think there's a world of co-creating content. Don't push it all onto the influencer. I think trying to find a way of doing something together is a good thing. if your brand lends to it, spark debate and discussion. That's what influencers are very good at. It's natural, right? It's exactly what you do down the pub. It's what you do, if you saw each other at a show or whatever. It's that very comfortable in the discussion. So if your brand lends itself to it, do that. I think just on that note, the biggest thing I would say to make sure you try and nail before you approach influencers is get your proposition right, understand who you are as a brand, what you want to be, how you want to say it, who you want to say it to, because it's very hard to start engaging someone else to communicate that message if you don't really know what it is yourself. And if you don't, I get so many people talk to me about unique selling points, and often they're just selling points. There's nothing unique about them. And I think, to go to Tom's point, the role within social is, you've got to think about what environment are people in when they're on social media. And they're in a kind of relaxed, scrolling, not really thinking about what they want to buy tomorrow type place. And it's really only interest that stops them. And so you've got to make sure that you can generate that interest very quickly. If I scroll past, lots of different posts that I don't want to set myself up for a fail here and say someone's USP that's the same as everybody else's. But there's always a few you scroll past, that later I can see 4 or 5 that will have exactly the same USP. I'm not going to stop with them. It doesn't really matter if it's an influencer, whether it's a lovely image or a video or just a great social post. If you haven't got that bit right, you're going to struggle.
So Siobhan, when it comes to actually doing an influencer partnership with a creator, what's that actually look like from a day-to-day perspective? Is it something you need to be really on, or are you constantly in touch with them on the daily, on the weekly? What does that look like?
From our point of view, or from a brand's point of view?
From a brand's point of view.
Okay, from a brand's point of view, I suppose it depends how you are approaching it. If you are contacting them directly, then yes, you're going to need to be kind of on that, providing the information they require, the brief, any products, and then checking in on their content to see when it was posted, how it was posted, and how it's performed. If you choose to go down an agency route, that's all dealt with for you. So all of that is dealt with the negotiation on price and such like. So it takes a lot of the admin and the day-to-day running of the campaign out of your hands and allows you to sort of sit back and see the results of it.
So we've talked around sort of a lot of what's happening now with influencers, and I know Siobhan, you live and breathe sort of the influencer market. Where do you see it going in the next few years?
Oh my word, I have absolutely no idea, to be perfectly honest, because how much has it changed in the last couple of years? I think whoever thought we'd be in a world maybe 5 years ago where influencers were representing our brands and our products. Where does it go? I don't know where it starts. I don't know where it finishes. I think one thing we do need is we need to maintain authenticity with it. I think we need to ensure that we're not using it, overusing it, that we maintain trust, that we keep an eye on those little niches that are appearing and how we can use those within the industry. There's more and more sort of veterinary creators appearing who are representing products with a different viewpoint. So they might not be the farmer using them, but they are somebody representing and advising, and they've got that initial trust piece sewn up. There's also an emerging market around sort of transparency and traceability, I feel, at the moment, where our consumers, the people we're producing food for, want to know more. And I think influencers have a huge part to play in that. And then maybe in the R&D side of products. At the moment, majority of partnerships are with products that are on the market, that are available. But I think there's maybe an opportunity for brands to involve creators earlier on and increase awareness from a much earlier stage of product development. I think we'll see more and more longer term partnerships that are monetized. I think we'll see less gifted products as creators become more established, and I think we will see the value, or I hope we'll see the value in the long term of that content moving from sort of ad hoc to brand ambassadors, markets that combine, and collaborations.
Adi, to where you think the Sorry, I could say myself then. Have you anything to add of where you think it's going in the future? Because I know traditionally, I don't quite agree with it anymore, but traditionally we are 5 years behind as an industry. What can sort of the consumer markets tell us around influencer marketing?
I don't think we're catching up quite quickly. I think what we're seeing right now is an explosion of people wanting to be influencers as well. That's something to bear in mind. There's a lot of very small influencers out there at the minute. There's a lot of imitation going on because it's seen as the way to do it. So I think we'll continue to see that for a little bit. Then I think what you'll see is probably an end up with a separation of that in terms of niching or, finding a bit of a gap in the market of all those people. I think what you'll see is, to Siobhan's point, influencers becoming like their own mini businesses, mini agencies, if you like. Some of them do it now already in terms of content production and selling their platform. It's essentially, when you're working with an influencer, it's no different to working with a publication. It's no different to working with a Google. What you're paying for is that reach, is that audience that's already been built, right? So they'll monetize that in different ways and in different streams. I think you'll see AI play a big part. If you think about AI over the last 2 years and just how incredible, even the last 6 months it's become. There's already big discussions around SEO and AI and how that's all interacting with each other. Not only will AI tools speed up the production of content for influencers, but it will also, in the future, who knows how that content is going to be consumed. So, that's definitely something I would watch for. And then emerging niches, influencers in places that don't have influence currently within the industry, that might crop up as as areas for people to really create a community around. Just because they're there now doesn't mean there's not any potential new ones that might come through. Food chain transparency might be one. Regen's one that's slightly smaller but is growing. Women in agriculture is one that's growing as well. All those pieces that are just away from your traditional kind of dairy, beef, lamb, arable sectors. There will be an orbit of other ones that kind of surround that as well.
One thing we have seen a lot, Siobhan, in the consumer market is sort of the co-creation of products and sort of services of influencers. I think that's a trend we'll see in agriculture, or do you think the scope's a bit different to what they can do?
I think we're already seeing it a lot with sort of clothing fashion lines within ag. I think there's a lot of collaboration and dual branded products. I'm not sure how much we'll see it in sort of larger, more investment pieces of kit on farms, but I do think we may see it more in that development stage, that people start to put their name to products earlier on, more startup type businesses, products maybe. I'm not really sure. I think there are, like Aid was saying about niches, I think there are areas that will collaborate, whether that's a woman creator with a waterproof company and they design a range that are specifically designed for a woman. I know we're seeing it with various footwear brands, with clothing. I think probably we'll see that initially. How that grows, I'm not entirely sure.
So we're not going to see Ollie Harrison Fendt anytime soon?
Well, watch this space.
So I know we're in sort of the last sort of 5 minutes of the webinar. If there's any questions, feel free to join in. I see a quick question coming in there. Would you say, in the terms of like influencer research, sort of Siobhan, like finding out the right ways, is it more of an organic research to find who's getting views online, or is it the tools and software do you use, or how can people find the right influencers for them?
So there are definitely tools and software out there. How accurate they are, I have started to question a little bit, and I suppose from doing a little bit more digging myself, realised that they are a little bit off to creators' platform data. So they are there and they give you a good steer. What I don't think they do is give you the human element of a creator. And so their reach might be great, their engagement might be poor, but if they resonate with your brand, it may still work. And I think that's something that you really need to consider is viewing the content as well as the figures and the numbers and putting the two together to find somebody that works for you.
RUAS, we've got a question. Someone brave enough to use a microphone, I think.
Hi there, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I work for the Balmoral Show, which is Northern Ireland's largest agri-food event. And in the past, we've used influencers, and it would have been more of a, we'll give you 2 tickets if you'd like to come along on the first day. And then they've all started to evolve a little more. And then this year it'll be £500 for a rail, it'll be £1,000 for a competition. I just wondered how you would recommend we approach people now, because I know the industry is changing and they're all becoming more savvy. So to make that initial contact, how would you recommend doing that?
So I think it will depend on the level of creator you're approaching as well. I think some of the smaller, more micro influencers are still happy to attend an event, shout about it. But, you know, we've got creators that attend events in that way, but command a fee of up to £3,000 to £4,000 to be at the event. And so I think it's very difficult to have a one size fits all depending on who you're approaching. So I think you will still appeal to creators with 2 gifted tickets if they're of that micro level. But when you start to grow in following, you have to take into consideration time away from the farm and potentially somebody to do their job whilst they're on the farm, the cost of that, plus the fact that this is a revenue stream, and if they're looking for meets and greets, things like that, it does impact on their day. So it's quite hard when you get to the larger followings to just offer gifted tickets.
Simon, another question?
Yeah, it leads me on to a question I was going to ask. Is there such a thing as a rate card for influencers then?
Yes, there is. We've, as the agency, we do have rate cards for different creators. It will be dependent on size of following, number of posts, size of term of partnership. But yes, there is now, you know, a fee structure in place to work with creators.
Great.
And I think that's all the questions we've got. So I'm going to pick on each one of you and sort of for you to give us your sort of key takeaway, what takeaway from working with influencers. And Natalie, I'm going to pick on you first.
I'd say probably make sure that you're choosing the right influencer and that you've got them to agree that you can see what they're going to put out before they put it out. Because we did have a couple of issues where we had to ask them to redo some content just for mistakes, inaccuracies. So I think, vet the content if you can, without being prescriptive. Just make sure it is at least accurate.
Tom?
Yeah, I will just go back to the point we've raised several times in terms of I would choose influencers that fit your overall target and audience, as opposed to just going after the biggest and what's perceived as the best. Because even the biggest macro influencers who have a large following, they might not be the most engaged following. Sometimes the micro, get attacked by a wasp here. Sometimes the micro influencers have a more engaged following, and that content may also fit better into a campaign that you're trying to push to a certain audience. So it may overall perform better than some of the larger perceived influencers.
AD?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that. I think, you know, if you're just starting out, start small, you know, pick influencers that you think, you know, have got a real voice and maybe a bit smaller, and test, learn fast with that kind of thing. Don't over control the content, you know, don't forget why you've picked them in the first place. And that is why they are getting the engagement. Use real world scenarios. Don't make it artificial. You know, I think Siobhan's point, you know, originally earlier in the session was around kind of work with them. You know, don't just kind of drop it off for 2 weeks and take it away, because it feels very artificial. So make it feel, you know, real world. And, you know, on to the point about how do you justify it internally, share feedback very quickly, do small tests, you know, base it on the stakeholders you're speaking to, but also try and reframe it a little bit from being influencers into content. it'll be a very different pitch, yeah, if that's the case.
And last but not least, Siobhan.
I think I'd consider where you want to use that content from the early stages, as opposed to looking back and wishing you'd had the rights to use it in email or paid social, or you wanted a testimonial from it. So I think decide where and how you'd like to use that content. If it is just on their platforms, amazing. But if it is that you want to reshare it, you want to use it in paid media, that needs to be agreed up front with a creator, so that everybody is aware of how it's being used. So that's something that quite often crops up. Oh, I wished I'd done this, or I need it for that, and we haven't. That's not been agreed. So yeah, and just trust works both ways. Trust the creator; they know what they're doing. They do this, so don't overprescribe.
Perfect. Well, if you don't have any more questions, then thanks everyone for joining us. I think it's been a really insightful session. I know I've personally enjoyed it. I hope everyone else has as well. And if there is any more questions or you want some more information, feel free to reach out. You should have my email from where we sent the links out, so feel free to drop me an email. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us.